Well, welcome back to the channel, 2BeLikeChrist. Let's talk about the call of Matthew to be an apostle of Jesus. So our next text up is Matthew chapter 9, and Jesus is calling Matthew, or also known as Levi, to be his apostle. This is recorded in several Gospels, and I actually want to read the account from Mark's Gospel. Mark 2:13 and 14. He went again beside the sea, and all the crowd was coming to him, and he was teaching them. And as he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, "Follow me." And he rose and followed him. So Jesus here has a great crowd of people following him, and that would include his disciples and the apostles that he's already called. And Jesus comes up to a tax collector, Levi or Matthew, and he says, "Follow me." Now, when we talk about tax collectors in the first century, we need to understand something, and that's that everyone hated them. And that's probably for a couple reasons. Number one, nobody likes paying taxes. It's like if the IRS shows up and tells you to pay your taxes, you don't want to give your money to them. The second one is that these people who took this position were considered Roman sellouts. They were Jews, but they had kind of sold themselves out to the Romans, the ruling nation, and all the Jews hated the Romans. The third one is that they were thieves, and they were notorious for being thieves. The tax rate would be maybe $5, and they would chalk it up to $6, and then they would take the increase off the top and put it in their own pocket. So imagine the response of the apostles that Jesus has already called when Jesus stops at this tax booth and asks Matthew to follow him. Many of Jesus' followers probably couldn't believe that he would even go up to somebody like this and ask him to join them. It was probably an ego check for some of them. The apostles probably felt like they were pretty special because this man who was the Messiah had selected them to be his followers. And now he's going to this man who everyone thinks is despicable and asking him to come along too. You ever been selected for a team, been one of the first, and you thought, wow, this is really an exclusive team to be on, and then come to find out when the rest of the people are recruited that you're not really anything special? Jesus was essentially putting all of these men on the same level. And that could have been a really hard thing to swallow for them. What the apostles could have done is just walked off in offense. If you're going to put me on a team with this guy, then I'm out of here. See ya. But to their credit, they didn't. And what these men really needed to understand more than anything was that they all needed Jesus just as badly as the tax collector. After Jesus calls Matthew, Matthew invites Jesus to come to a feast at his house. And the text says that at this feast there were sinners and tax collectors all around him. And the Pharisees take a look over there and they're saying, wait a second, this man claims to be the Messiah and yet he's over here with tax collectors and sinners? Why is that? Jesus tells them that it's because those who are well don't need the doctor. It's those who are sick that need the doctor. And the sinners and the tax collectors were certainly sin sick. The Pharisees were as well. The problem was that they couldn't acknowledge that. They could not come to the realization that they needed Jesus just as bad as the other sinners. Later on in his ministry, Jesus will tell a parable that illustrates this really well. Two men went into the temple to pray. One was a tax collector, and the other one was a Pharisee. The Pharisee was praying to God, and he said, "Lord, thank you for not making me like this tax collector. I don't commit adultery. I don't steal. I'm not an extortioner. Thank you for making me such a good person." But the tax collector was praying, and he wouldn't even lift his face to heaven because he was praying for forgiveness. He said, "Lord, have mercy on me because I am a sinner." Two men, but with very different perceptions of how badly they needed God's help. And Jesus says that it was the tax collector who went away justified. Now time for a little bit of modern day application. What can someone who isn't a part of the church learn from this? You ever heard somebody play the comparison game? Somebody will say, well, I'm a pretty good person and I don't think God would send me to hell because at least I'm not like this guy over here. Like, I haven't killed anybody, I haven't cheated on my wife, I haven't stole anything from the IRS. The idea being, well, because I don't sin like those people sin, I'll be all right. And that was precisely the attitude of the Pharisees. They looked at the sinners and said, I don't do the things that they do, I'll be all right. And Jesus' entire message to them was that wasn't true. Just because they didn't sin like them didn't mean that they didn't have a need for forgiveness, and that was only to be found in Christ. All right, but what about people who are inside the church? Think about the way that we look at people who are outside of the church and our attitude towards reaching out to those people. I think there's definitely times when we look at people and we think, I'm not really interested with sharing the gospel with that individual, or that individual would never be interested, or I just don't really want to be associated with those kinds of people. The only reason that we would feel that way as members of the church would be for us somehow to think ourselves better than that individual. And really, the gospel is all about that. That's not true. We're not. And just like we needed Jesus to save us from our corruption, those people need it as well. And so there's not anybody who I should ever look at and say, just not going to take the gospel to them because I don't really want to be around them. Okay, now think about, for us Christians in the church, how we view other people who are in the church, particularly people who fall into sin. I imagine that it's the same in your congregation, but I have experienced this before, and that's that there are some sins that are definitely considered worse than others. And those who commit those sins are kind of treated as second-class Christians. Getting pregnant before you're married, having an affair, doing something criminal that you got caught for. I've seen it happen that when someone's caught up in one of these kind of gross sins, many people in the congregation never look at them the same again. And a lot of times they kind of look down their nose at that individual, always remembering the sin that they committed. And it's very hard for that Christian ever to recover their reputation in the church. Again, I think the only reason that you would have second-class Christians, or those who are looked down on, is because you have a Pharisaical problem in the first-class Christians. What is their issue? Their issue is that they don't appreciate that they need Jesus just as bad as these other people. I want to read you the opening text of the parable that we just talked about, the two men in the temple. Jesus tells that parable for this reason. Luke 18, verse 9. He also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and treated others with contempt. Unfortunately, there are people who look down at others with contempt because they sin differently than they sin. And the entire message of Jesus was that no one should be looking down on anyone else because you all need me just as bad as the guy next to you. So in summary, we have three groups of people. We have the apostles, who Jesus called before he went to the tax booth. We have Matthew, who he called at the tax booth. And then we have the Pharisees. All three of these groups of people sinned differently, needed Jesus just as bad. And their perception of their need dictated the way that they lived. The Pharisees outright rejected Christ. And I'm going to encourage you and myself not to have that same attitude, because we can reject Christ just as easily when we look down on other people and we diminish our need for Jesus by elevating our self-righteousness. Hi everybody, thanks for watching the video. If you have not subscribed, do that. The channel's growing, and thank you for all your support and comments. Like the video, share it with your friends, comment down below if you have anything to say, and I'll see you guys next time.